Welcome to Spyder Auto's step bar installation guide for the 4-door Jeep Wrangler. Before we get started, you'll need a 10, 13, and 16 mm socket and ratchet. We've laid out the contents of your step bar kit for illustration purposes. First and foremost, you'll need to get your brackets in the correct order. You may notice that the brackets are different lengths. The shortest bracket goes to the rear, the longest goes to the center, and the medium length one goes to the front. The brackets will mount at these points. Let's start with the front bracket. Locate a 13 mm bolt. Add a lock ring, then add a washer. This bolt will fit into this factory threaded hole to mount the bracket. The bracket will mount at the points marked here. Be sure that the bracket is inboard of the body rail when mounting it. Install the 13 mm bolt into the threaded hole to mount the bracket to the body. Leave the bolt finger tight. Now locate two 10 mm bolts and add a washer. Install a 10 mm bolt through the bracket and body rail. Then add a washer onto the bolt stud. Then add a 10 mm lock nut over the washer onto the bolt stud. Leave it finger tight for now. Then install the other 10 mm bolt through the bracket and body rail. Add a washer onto the bolt stud. Then add a 10 mm lock nut over the washer onto the stud. Now we'll move on to the center bracket. The center bracket will mount using these holes. Again, be sure that the bracket is mounted inboard. As we did earlier, locate a 13 mm bolt and add a lock ring and washer. Install the 13 mm bolt into the threaded hole in the underbody to mount the center bracket. As we did for the first bracket, locate two 10 mm bolts and add a washer to each. Install a 10 mm bolt through the bracket and body rail as shown. Then add a washer onto the bolt stud. Now add a 10 mm lock nut over the washer. Install the other 10 mm bolt through the bracket and body rail. Once more, add a washer onto the bolt stud. Then add a 10 mm lock nut onto the bolt stud. Leave it finger tight. Now onto the rear bracket. The rear bracket will mount here. Be sure it mounts inboard of the body rail. Once again, locate a 13 mm bolt and add a lock ring and washer. Install a 13 mm bolt to mount the rear bracket. Remember, finger tight. And as with the other two brackets, now locate two 10 mm bolts and add a washer. Install the 10 mm bolt through the bracket and body rail. Add a washer onto the bolt stud. Then add a 10 mm lock nut. Install another 10 mm bolt through the bracket and body rail. Again, add a washer. Then add a 10 mm lock nut. Before we move on, tighten the 6 10 mm bolts and nuts that secure the brackets to the body rail. Don't tighten the other bolts yet though. Now mount the step bar. Verify that the step bar is correct for that side. Locate 6 16 mm bolts. Add a lock ring to each bolt. Then add a large washer to each bolt. Install two 16 mm bolts to mount the step bar to the center bracket. Leave them finger tight for now. Now install the two 16 mm bolts to mount the step bar to the rear bracket. Install two 16 mm bolts to mount the step bar to the front bracket. Now adjust your step bars as needed. Now that we've adjusted everything, let's tighten it all down. Tighten the 6 16 mm step bar bolts. Then tighten the 3 13 mm underbody bracket bolts. Now we'll just check that our step bar is secure, and we're finished. Congratulations, you've fitted your 4-door Jeep Wrangler with a set of step bars from Spyder Auto.